All right, well, it's been a little while since we've had to do any DIYs on the cars, but the 650i has come back in the garage here to get a little diagnosis because the other day I noticed that down here at the bottom I had a little coolant leak. And actually it wasn't a little coolant leak, it was a pretty good sized coolant leak. Hard to tell where these things leak from, so we're going to have to take the rock shield off and look up under there and see where it's leaking. And we'll go through some of the common leak points as well, just to figure out where this thing's leaking at. We'll get set up here and see if we can figure out where this car's leaking coolant from. All right, let's lift her up. We got some coolant dripping from somewhere. Right there, as you can see. So, hard to tell where it's coming from because it just kind of runs along on the rock shield and then it finds the lowest spot and then it leaks out. So what we want to do is take the rock shield off and get everything exposed so we can see where this leak is coming from. So she's up on the lift now, and as we can see, that drop that was on the floor, you just saw it actually drop. It is dripping from right there. So there's nothing up above there that's leaking, but it's running from somewhere. So it's coming out from somewhere, who knows where. So now we got to get these rock shields off and see where it may be coming from. So there, you can see right here, looks like some coolant is fixing to drip down. And there it goes. So dripping somewhere up above this belly pan right here. So we're going to take that off and see where it's dripping down onto that little pan. So this plate can come off as long as you're not going to drive the vehicle, but you can't drive the vehicle without that plate on there because it's a piece of the suspension. But we can take it off while it's on the lift. Now we got the pan off, and as we can see in the pan there, get some light on it. You can see in our pan that there's just a whole lot of stuff. Yeah, so we definitely got a leak somewhere. Okay. So now with everything off, we can diagnose where this leak is coming from. I'm going to get a towel and we'll wipe everything down, and then we're just going to have to let it sit for a little bit and figure out where these leaks are coming from. We'll just wipe everything that's shiny down. I can see a lot back here. I can see some right there. All along there. Up in there. I saw a drip drop. Oh, this is not looking good. We're way back here where the transmission is. And if it's leaking back here, then that means it's probably leaking in between the motor and the transmission, because there's a crossover plate back there. It may be that I'm going to be pulling the transmission to fix this leak. Because right here, there's normally little plugs that go in these holes right here. Get the camera where you can see. So normally this is the front of the motor, and then you go, here's the oil filter. Right here is where it bolts up to the bell housing, where the engine bolts up. And there's some little weep holes right here that allow coolant or other things to leak out if you have a bad seal. So if it's leaking out of these little holes here in between the motor and the transmission, then it may be that crossover plate, or we can look up top and see it may be something like one of the pipes that's right up by the firewall. that's leaking, letting it run down. But usually they'll run around the outside. If it's leaking directly out of these holes, then it's pinched in between, and that's where that plate is in the back. So we're going to clean it off and then figure out where this leak is coming from. And this is a bad leak. This is not a leak like going to be easy to fix. This means we got to pull this transmission, if that is indeed what that's about. So if you do find a leak like this and somebody tells you that it's leaking in between the motor and the transmission, then it's not going to be an easy one to just fix. It's not going to be a pipe, not going to be a fitting. It's actually going to be that crossover plate up there, or up on top there may be something leaking from above. So before I go into figuring out what I'm going to do, I'm going to lower the car back down, look in behind the motor right at the firewall, and just see if there's anything up there leaking. If there's nothing up there leaking, then odds are I'm going to have to pull this transmission, slide it back, fix that crossover, and then put it all back together. So that'll be a whole video in itself. But if you're looking for leaks, normally when you get some age on these, they may start leaking here at the crossover, so you may get coolant coming down these. Another good place that it leaks is, if I can get the light up in there, let's see if we can shine the light up into the hole there. There's the main coolant pipe right up here where my finger's pointing. I don't know if you can see it. Way up there where my finger's pointing is the big coolant line that goes into the radiator. Right on top of it is a sensor, and that sensor's O-ring leaks a lot of times. It'll leak straight down here, make a puddle somewhere in the floor. When you take it off, you'll see coolant around here, but I don't see any coolant here. Another place that they leak is up here. If you see leaks around in this area underneath the motor, like right in front of the power steering where the belts and everything, then that might be the water pump going bad and the seals have gone out of it. If the crossover tube that's inside the motor is leaking, you'll also have leaks right here. So could be the water pump, could be the crossover tube. The crossover tube, having to fix it is a big deal, because you have to take the intake off and do some finagling around with either buying a kit or taking the front of the motor off. From what I hear, I've never done it, and taking all that off in order to slide that tube out. Well, all right, we're going to let her sit for a little bit. I'm going to get a doggy pee pad and put it underneath the car here, and then we're going to just see where exactly this drips are coming from, and then we'll follow back up here in just a little bit. So down here on the ground, what I did is put 2 of the doggy pee pads, because they'll absorb the drips and won't let them run off anywhere. And so they're right up underneath the motor. And so since it only seems to be leaking when it's cold, then I'm going to have to let it sit for a little while and figure out where these leaks are coming from. So I'll leave this sit. We'll give it an afternoon on the lift here and just kind of let it diagnose itself, see if it can tell us where it's got leaks. All right. Well, we let the car sit for a day or so, and just to see where it's leaking. So as you can see on the doggy pee pad, we got a line of drops right across through there, and some of it's had a little bit of oil that was taken with the drips of coolant, and you can see the dark spots of the coolant there. So if we look directly up above, what we see is the transition between the transmission and the engine. So for my particular coolant leak, which happens to be one of the harder ones to take care of, I'm going to be taking the transmission out and fixing that little crossover plate seal that's right in between the transmission and the motor there. So we'll go ahead and put the car back together, and we'll get set up here in a day or two when the parts come in, and continue this video on how to remove the transmission and replace that little crossover plate.